1 Corinthians chapter 7. 1 Corinthians 7 begins the second part of Paul's letter, first letter to the church of Corinth. In chapters 1 through 6, Paul, as we know, dealt with the sins within the church of Corinth. And from the opening statement of this 7th chapter, now concerning the things whereof ye wrote unto me, we see that Paul now begins to respond to a letter that he had received from them regarding some questions. And the chapter opens with the question about marriage and divorce in verses 1 through 9. Then in verses 10 through 24, there's the issue of whether it was proper for a saved person to continue in the married state with an unsaved person. And then beginning in verse 25, there's another issue now concerning, and the issue there is whether it was advisable for virgins to remain unmarried. And then from chapter 7, Paul would continue to address various questions throughout this second portion. You can notice in chapter 8, verse 1, now his touching, and he's going to address another issue. Chapter 12 and verse 1, now concerning. And then in chapter 16 and verse 1, now concerning. And those are introductory to different questions that Paul is going to address. We want to read verses 25 through verse 35. Now concerning virgins, I have no commandment of the Lord. Yet I give my judgment, or I give my opinion, as one that hath obtained mercy of the Lord to be faithful. I suppose, therefore, that this is good for the present distress. I say that it is good for a man so to be. Art thou bound unto a wife? Seek not to be loosed. Art thou loosed from a wife? Seek not a wife. And if thou marry, thou hast not sinned. The reason, he has no commandment. And if a virgin marry, she hath not sinned. Nevertheless, such shall have trouble in the flesh, but I spare you. In other words, I'm not going to go into that. Verse 29, but this I say, brethren, the time is short. It remaineth that both they that have wives be as though they had none, and they that weep as though they wept not, and they that rejoice as though they rejoiced not, and they that buy as though they possessed not, and they that use this world as not abusing it, for the fashion of this world passeth away. But I would have you without carefulness. He that is unmarried careth for the things that belong to the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But he that is married careth for the things that are of the world, how he may please his wife. There is a difference also between a wife and a virgin. The unmarried woman careth for the things of the Lord, that she may be holy both in body and in spirit. But she that is married careth for the things of the world, how she may please her husband. And this I speak for your own profit, not that I may cast a snare upon you, but for that which is comely or beautiful, and that you may attend upon the Lord without distraction. So here Paul is addressing the matter of whether one should remain single or be married. In verse 25 he states, I have no commandment of the Lord. That is, the Lord doesn't say one way or the other. He is saying that there is no commandment for one to remain single or to be married. And he goes on to state his opinion concerning the matter. He states in verses 26 and 27 that due to the present distress, notice those two words in verse 26, or three words, the present distress. Due to that, he says it is best for the single to remain so, and for the married to remain so. He states in verse 28 that due to the fact that there is no commandment of the Lord regarding these things, that if the single marry, they have not sinned. He then proceeds in verses 29 through 31 to give them exhortations. And in verse 32, he states his desire for them. I would have you without carefulness. And then in verse 33 and 34, he gives further detail concerning his opinion on single life and married life. And then in verse 35, he states his reason and his desire for stating his opinion on this matter for your profit, for your own profit. He says, I've said these things for your benefit, for your well-being. And the goal and aim of what is stated is that you may attend upon the Lord without distraction. That is, without diversion, without being sidetracked, without being drawn away. And that is the concluding thought of the text. And everything that Paul has said in the text points to this, that you may attend upon the Lord without distraction. So it is Paul's desire for them that nothing get in the way of attention and focus upon the Lord. That nothing impede, obstruct, or hamper their relationship to the Lord. And that nothing interfere with their service to the Lord. He is saying, this is why I'm telling you these things. For this reason. So, this is what the passage is about. That you may attend upon the Lord without distraction. That's what it's about. He addresses the question of single life and married life. But that's really, that's secondary. This is the primary point. That you may attend upon the Lord without distraction. Now, I just checked briefly today and all the commentaries I have on 1 Corinthians. And every one of them spent the majority of their comments upon the subject of the question regarding single or married life. Very, very, very little was said about verse 35. Verse 35 is the main point. That's why he's telling them what he's telling them. He says, this is my reason, that you may serve, that you may attend upon the Lord without distraction. So they get caught up on all these, the secondary matter, and they ignore the primary matter, and that's exactly what the Lord is warning against. That's exactly what Paul is warning against. And it's the trap that the commentators fall into. So this is Paul's main thought. that you may attend upon the Lord without distraction. That's the lesson of the text. And it is from that we want to take the main thought of the message. The subject is, don't let life get in the way of serving the Lord. Let's look at the text, not every verse, but in looking at the text, the thought that we must not get away from is that you may attend upon the Lord without distraction. That's the concluding thought. That's the thought we must not get away from. In verse 25, Paul states that it is his responsibility in life to be faithful. That is, to be constant, to be true, to be devoted, to be steadfast, to be dedicated, to be committed to the Lord. The setting of the text, verse 26, is present distress. And it's almost beyond belief how much time commentators spend upon discussing present distress. What is that? What was Paul referring to? And off they go. Doesn't say. Never says. He just says present distress. It conveys the idea of that which causes pain. So they were in a painful situation. Reading the first 6 chapters, and no wonder. They were in a painful situation. It's that which causes suffering, that which causes trouble and strain. And that alone, the present distress, can be a great distraction. So that's the setting. The setting of what he says is it was a distressful time. Again, remember the main thought, that you may attend upon the Lord without distraction. Don't become so distressed about secondary matters that you're distracted from the main thing. The distress, present distress, is not the main thought of the text. Now, you wouldn't know that by reading commentaries when you spend 4 pages on the present distress when it doesn't even say what it is. That's not the main thought. That's not the main idea. That's not the main focus. It never is. In verse 32, Paul states his desire for them. He said, I would have you without. That is, I would have you to be absent and free from carefulness. That's freedom from an overriding concern. Nothing wrong with having a concern about something. But when it overrides everything else, it's become a problem. That's carefulness. He's saying, I want you to be free from an overriding concern. I want you to be free from an overriding attention to something. Again, nothing wrong with giving attention to some things. But when it overrides the Lord, that's a problem. And that's what he's addressing. It's an overriding engrossment with the affairs of life. So Paul's desire for them is that they would live free of worrisome anxiety about worldly matters in order that they could serve the Lord with undivided attention and devotion without distraction. Again, that's the main idea. That you may attend upon the Lord. Then notice, without. There it is again, that word without. That is, absent and free from distraction. Paul says you need to be free from distraction. Now, in studying a text, whatever it is, it's important that we recognize repetition of words. If you're studying a verse, if you're studying a text, recognize repetition, because that's emphasis. It's the subject matter. And in verses 32 through 34, there is the repetition of several words. And again, they all relate to that you may attend upon the Lord without distraction. That's what it's all leading to. Now, these repeated words are important. They're crucial to the main idea. The main idea that you may attend upon the Lord without distraction. So let's look at some of these words. It begins in verse 32. I would have you without carefulness. Note that word carefulness. Speaks of a state of being. Related to this word is the word careth. You see it in verse 32. You see it again in verse 33. And you see it twice in verse 34. It speaks of an engrossment, an obsession, again, an overriding concern. It speaks of that which we are absorbed with. The word is used in the positive in verse 32. It is used in the negative in verse 33. And in verse 34, it is used both in the positive and the negative. So you have that word carefulness related to that 4 times, the word careth. The next word that we want to notice is the word things. Things. That speaks of the object of the care. It speaks of the matter of attention, the matter of concern and focus. And this word appears 4 times. Again, twice in the positive and twice in the negative. And these things, notice verse 32, you have things twice. And then in verse 34, you have things twice. And these things are divided into 2 categories. The Lord, the things of the Lord, and the world, the things of the world. 4 times the word things, twice referring to the Lord, twice referring to the world. It is things that belong to the Lord, the things of the Lord, and it is things that are of the world, things of the world. So from that, we see that there are concerns relating to the Lord. And there are concerns, that's what the word careth is, it's our concerns, relating to the world. This is reality. There are spiritual and eternal things, and there are temporal and fleeting things. That's reality. The matter that Paul is dealing with here is that the temporal and the fleeting things do not distract from the spiritual and the eternal things. That's what he's dealing with. People say, well, he's dealing with whether or not someone should remain single or someone should be married. That's secondary. The real issue is our concern with the things of the Lord and our concern with the things of the world, and that we make sure that the things that are concerns with the things of the world do not distract us from the things of the world. So the matter that he's dealing with is that the temporal and fleeting things do not overshadow, do not take precedence over spiritual and eternal things. And I believe that's always so. There are spiritual and eternal things, and there are temporal and fleeting things, and they are reality, and they must be put somewhere in our lives. They must be given some place in our lives, and where they are in our lives has everything to do with the main idea of the text, which is giving attention to the Lord without distraction. Again, this is reality. Spiritual things, worldly things. And these matters produce an effect in us. They produce a reaction in us. That brings us to our next word. The word how. You see it in verse 32. You see it again in verse 33. And you see it again in verse 34. It introduces an effect. An overriding focus, an overriding concern and attention upon the things that belong to the Lord, or an overriding focus, concern, and attention upon the things that are of the world. And this is seen in the threefold repetition of how. How. And then you have the word please. Also verse 32. Verse 33 and verse 34. Meaning to gratify, to accommodate. So it is a matter that you have the things of the Lord and you have the things of the world. And if you have an overriding concern for the things of the world, you seek to gratify the world, you seek to accommodate the world. And if you have an overriding concern for the Lord, then you seek to gratify the Lord, you seek to please Him, you seek to accommodate. So it speaks of our chief desire. Where our main concern is where our chief desire is. If our main concern at any time is the world or the temporal, the fleeting, then that's also our desire. If our overriding attention is upon the Lord, then the Lord is our chief desire. Again, all leading to that we give attention to the Lord without distraction. In the examples of the unmarried and married man, verse 32 and 33, and the unmarried and married woman, verse 34. The direction of desire is determined by the overriding focus and attention. Again, verse 32. He that is unmarried careth, has an overriding attention upon the things that belong to the Lord, how he may please the Lord. Verse 33, but he that is married careth for the things that are of the world. That's his overriding attention, how he may please his wife. That's their desire. That's the direct, you see, he's speaking of the direction of desire. We need to always keep an eye. We've said many times on the direction in which we're headed, whether it be our thoughts, our feet, whatever. But we also need to always keep a careful eye upon the direction of our desire. Is the direction of our desire beginning to override our desire for the Lord? If so, you need to change direction. You need to change direction. So, the examples are contrast between spiritual and temporal. Concerning the spiritual, again, verse 32, careth for the things that belong to the Lord, how he may please the Lord. That needs to be our focus. That needs to be our attention, the things of the Lord. And when that is the case, then our chief desire is how we may please, how we may gratify and accommodate the Lord. In verse 34, careth for the things of the Lord, talking about the unmarried woman, that she may be holy, both in body and in spirit. When the overriding concern is the Lord, there is a desire to be both outwardly and inwardly what the Lord would have us to be. When you change that, and the overriding concern or attention is the world, then our desires begin to move in that direction, and the Lord, if it goes on long enough, becomes secondary. And that's never to be. We are to give attention to the Lord without distraction. So the whole matter here is our focus. The whole matter is, it's a matter of where our values and our loyalties lie. It is a matter of which shapes our thinking, our views, and our attitudes. The things of the Lord or the things of the world. It is a matter of where our aspirations are, our desires. The things of the Lord or the things that are of the world. It is a matter of what controls us and dominates our lives. The things of the Lord or the things that are of the world. Again, the truth is, the direction of desire is a manifestation of our focus. It is a manifestation of our main concern. Nothing else is ever to become our main concern. I'm not saying you can't have a concern. It's not to become the main concern. The Lord is always to be the main concern, whatever the situation. So it is a matter of what dominates our lives. The things of the Lord or the things of the world. And again, that's a manifestation of our focus. So the purpose of the text is that we may attend unto the Lord without distraction. That is, do not allow life to get in the way of the Lord. The Lord gives us the gift of life. And life entails many, many, many gifts. And then we turn and allow those gifts from God to distract us from Him. And that's what Paul is talking about. And it's a very real danger. Life very easily gets in the way of the Lord, of us and the Lord. So putting everything in perspective. There are the things that belong to the Lord, the things of the Lord. And there are the things that are of the world. There are spiritual and eternal things. There are temporal and fleeting things. And again, these are real. These are reality. And if we're going to truly serve the Lord, there has to be a proper perspective concerning these two realities. The Lord, the temporal. They're both real. We must have a proper perspective. If we're going to serve the Lord without being drawn away, there must be a proper perspective concerning the spiritual and eternal things and the temporal and fleeting things. And we are very prone to allow life to draw us away from the Lord. We've all done it. We're all still doing it to some extent, in some area. It's a very dangerous thing. Again, this is the main thought. This is the goal, that you may attend upon the Lord without distraction. Do not allow the world to get in the way of serving the Lord. Don't allow the temporal and the fleeting to become the primary thing. Oh, but you don't realize how serious this is. It's not more serious than the Lord. The secondary is never to become the primary thing. The Lord must be the primary thing. That doesn't mean that we neglect the secondary, that we ignore it. It's a matter of having things in their proper place. The Lord must be first. Never second. Never second. Always first. And this is necessary if we're going to attend unto the Lord without distraction. So then he gives some examples. He speaks concerning married life in verse 29. They that have wives be as though they had none. Now again, you've got to keep everything in the context here. Though the instruction there is addressed to husbands, it of course applies to both husbands and wives. The instruction based upon the teaching of Scripture is not to abandon or neglect marital responsibilities. That's not what he's teaching at all. That would be contrary to Scripture. But don't forget the main idea. Serving the Lord without distraction. So what he's talking about is a call for commitment. It is a call for commitment to spiritual and eternal matters in marriage. When it comes to marriage, both husband and wife need to be committed to spiritual and eternal matters, not temporal and fleeting matters. That's what he's talking about. Again, remember the main thought. Remember the main idea, that you may attend upon the Lord without distraction. The teaching is that a husband and a wife should fulfill their position as husbands and wives in view of their relationship to the Lord. You never go outside of that relationship with the Lord. That's primary. Never is that secondary. That's always primary. He is first. He is first. Marriage should not, again, remember the main idea, attend upon the Lord without distraction. Marriage should not get in the way of serving the Lord. And this is true whether married or contemplating marriage. That's why a saved person should not marry an unsaved person, because that is going to get in the way of serving the Lord. That's why you do not intermarry denominations. It's going to get in the way. The goal, the aim, is to attend upon the Lord without distraction. So that must be maintained in married life. So married life should never be a distraction to the Lord. Married life should rather be an avenue of serving the Lord. Remember the main thing. Then he goes in verse 30, and he speaks of sorrow and joy. These are realities. There's going to be sorrow, there's going to be joy. They that weep, as though they wept not. They that rejoice, as though they rejoiced not. Again, weeping, a reality. Joy, a reality. The instruction here is not a rebuke to weeping, and it's not a rebuke to rejoicing. Again, remember the main idea, that you may attend upon the Lord without distraction. That is, do not allow sorrow or joy to deter, to control, to dominate your life. Don't get so caught up in the sorrow that you're distracted from the Lord. Don't get so caught up in the joy that you are distracted from the Lord. Do not allow sorrow or joy to become the main thing. Oh, you don't understand what has happened. Do not allow sorrow to become the main thing. It's not the main thing. Even when you think it's the main thing, it's not the main thing. The Lord is the main thing. Do not allow joy to become the main thing. In other words, do not allow sorrow or joy to come between you and the Lord. As in marriage, view sorrow and joy as a way of serving the Lord. I have sorrow. My main concern should be, what does the Lord want me to do? How am I to serve God in this sorrow? Or joy, whatever the case might be. And those can change within minutes. Then he speaks in verse 30 concerning the business of life. And they that buy, as though they possess not. Again, the instruction is not a rebuke of buying, and it's not a rebuke of possessing. Remember the main thought and idea, that you may attend upon the Lord without distraction. Buying and possessing is not to distract from the Lord. We use this example at home church several times. You buy a boat. You work Monday through Friday. You have 2 days to use that boat, Saturday and Sunday. When are you going to use it? Saturday and Sunday. You have bought that which is going to prove to be a distraction from the Lord. Don't do that, is what Paul is saying. Don't do that. Life consists of buying and possessing. There are the business affairs of life. The instruction is, whatever you buy, keep everything in its place. Whatever you buy is never to take precedence over the Lord. Whatever you possess is never to take precedence over the Lord. So whatever we buy or possess should not get in the way of serving the Lord, but should be an avenue to serving the Lord. Then in verse 31, he moves on to how we use the world. And again, the instruction is not a rebuke regarding worldly concerns. Life consists of worldly and earthly concerns and matters. And in such, we are instructed here to use this world. That's what God's put it here for. We're to use it. But then the important thing is not abusing it. That's what people seem to forget. So, we are to make necessary and proper use of the world for clothing, for food, for shelter, for medicine, for protection, etc. But we are not to make it a matter of indulgence or to make it the primary object and purpose of life. Then it becomes a distraction. So the teaching of all of this is that the spiritual has precedence over the temporal. And as basic as that is, and as simple as that is, it is something due to our human nature and due to the nature of the world in which we live that we must always be checking, all the time. Guarding against that God is first. And when you put God first of all, the world is not going to understand it. Don't expect them to. Secondly, most of God's people are going to give you a problem over it as well, because it's not what they do. Again, verse 35, I speak for your own profit. He says, I'm telling you these things for your own gain, for your own advantage, for your own well-being. Put the Lord first. You never lose by doing that. Oh, it may appear, but you never lose. And it may appear that you've gained by putting the temporal ahead of the spiritual, but that's not the case. And then he goes on and he says, I tell you these things not to put a snare upon you. Well, you know there is such a thing as liberty. Yes. And Paul says, I'm not telling you these things to cause enslavement in your life. Putting the Lord first is not enslavement. Enslavement comes is when you get things out of order. And you become a slave to the temporal. And now you're no longer able to serve the Lord. And then notice, verse 35, but for that which is commonly. I tell you these things, he says, to make your life beautiful. To make your life beautiful. And then that you may attend upon the Lord. Without, that is, absent and free from distraction. So from verse 35, we see that Paul is saying in his exhortations, don't get bogged down with earthly matters. We all have earthly matters. We all have concerns about earthly matters. We all have responsibilities in earthly matters. But it's never to take precedence over our responsibilities to God. Due to the nature of the world in which we live, which is completely absorbed with the here and now and the material, and due to the nature of sin, rebellion and moving away from God, and due to human nature, self-absorption, and due to the ploys of Satan, it is a constant danger that the child of God be sucked up by the quicksands of the world. And when I talk about the world, I'm not just talking about sinful things. I'm talking about legitimate things, legitimate concerns. We all have them. There'd something be seriously wrong with us if we didn't. We must not be swallowed up. These must not become the main thing. Oh, that we may attend upon the Lord without distraction. We live in a time where I believe people enjoy being distracted. They take joy, and I believe they seek it. Distractions. We must not be distracted from the Lord. Ever. And when we find ourselves moving in that direction, we find that happening in our lives, we need to stop, slow down, readjust your focus, get it where it belongs, and then you can deal with the concerns of life. That's how you responsibly deal with the distractions and the concerns of life, is you stay close to the Lord. That's how you can handle it. That's how you can deal with it wisely. Stay close to the Lord. Don't let anything pull you away. Nothing. Attend upon the Lord without distraction. God help us. Brother Ben, if you'll come and lead us